So you're asking me why I think the source I provided is correct and all the others are wrong. And I'm responding now because it's the end of the day and I've been out with my daughter, if that's all right with you. So the source I provided was an article I wrote and researched myself and did a deep dive into the history of this, because every year I see the same arguments given that Christians tried to Christianize the Samhain holiday or whatever, stole it from the Celts, blah, blah, blah. And to be honest, I just got fed up with it. And I wanted to look into it myself and see what the truth of the matter was. And being somewhat of an obsessive historian myself, I went down the rabbit hole. I looked up the earliest sources I can find. And not to mention the fact that I traced the history, if you notice in my article, which is something I like to do when I present historical arguments, is make a nice traceable timeline of events to show that if there's an origin, we want to look as far back in the history as possible to say, this is where it begins as far as we can tell, or whatever similarities, and this is how it progressed, and this is where we get to. So like with the All Hallows holiday festival, it began in the 2nd and 3rd century with annual commemorations to the deaths of people who were martyred. That carried on through the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. Eventually, like I said in my other video, the 7th century, it was commemorated in May in line with the consecration of the Pantheon in Rome. And then later, 100 years later, it was moved to November the 1st to line up with the consecration of St. Peter's Basilica. By this point, Ireland and most of Europe, as we can see in the Martyrology of Tollach, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly still, they had been celebrating All Saints' Day and All Hallows' Eve for a long time. So in 830, they were already doing this for a long time. And November was celebrated in Germany. Ireland was doing it in April. The original date was in May, and then it was moved to November. So you can see there's a whole lot of dates going on, all of which are unconnected to Ireland and anything Celtic at all. So when the Pope decided that November the 1st should be All Saints' Day to line up with his consecration of a new big fancy church, Ireland was celebrating this already for hundreds of years by this point in April. So you see, it wasn't the Celts are encroaching on our religion, let's slap a new holiday on it that looks similar so they can all convert. Why? They're already doing it on a different day, months away from Samhain. And while we're talking about Samhain, yes, it's a common thing. All the, the 7, 10 Celtic cultures of the ancient world had some kind of festival or marked end at October 31st, the 1st of November by our calendars, because that is when their New Year's happened. The 1st of November was their New Year. Samhain is a Celtic Gaelic word, which means summer's end. And so they were just saying, this is the end of summer. That's it, it's just a word. Even then, there's no reference to that word until the 10th century in Irish folklore, which talks of it as anything really. It's just the first reference to it. And during this time, in 800s, 9th century, 10th century, when this martyrology was written, the Irish Christians and English Christians had been celebrating All Saints' Day, All Hallows' Day, Eve, in April. And then this book writes about the fact that they did it in April 20th actually. And then it mentions a festival called Stormy Samhain. This is the first time it's mentioned as a particular festival thing. And it is only to celebrate 3 holy Irish people. So to bullet point this, 800s, Irish people, Christians, celebrated it in April. The 9th, 10th century, It's written about as this date as being celebrated all over Europe on this day. The Pope wants to move it to November to coincide with a church consecration in Rome. Samhain is first mentioned in this same text, an ancient Irish text, so going back to these sources, as a thing called Stormy Samhain, which celebrated 3 local holy Irish people, and that is it. The connection to November, October 31st, and anything in the Celtic Isles is completely disconnected and unrelated. There's no way you can say the Pope decided to do this to overwrite a Celtic festival when they were already celebrating this in Ireland for hundreds of years prior to this point on a different day. There's just no need. Any and all of the earliest Irish texts we have do not make any connection to Samhain and religious or Celtic, Druidic, supernatural things. It's just not there. At most, there is a 10th century text, which, if I'm going to say it right, is called Sanas Comaic. Probably saying that wrong. That mentions a festival called Beltane, which is in May, and it's where Druids had 2 ritual fires and they drove their cattle between them to protect them from the coming year. That's the only supernatural Druidic mention. Samhain is mentioned in this text, but it is only mentioned as a time for feasting, meeting with friends and getting drunk. So kind of like modern Halloween. Plus there was marketing, sports and various other activities, but nothing remotely religious or supernatural happened during this Samhain festival. We don't get supernatural stuff going on until the 12th century text, Macmynarthyn Finn, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of again, which means boyhood deeds of Finn McColmholm. I'm probably saying his name wrong. That talks about this time of year being something where the fairy mounds are open and you can go and see them for something to do with relationships, to try and woo her, the fairies, or something to help your own relations or something. I don't know, it's a bit weird, but this is the only mention of anything supernaturally going on at this time. So again, there's still no connection to church, Samhain, spooky stuff. If anything, that's more of a later medieval, even neo-pagan modern stuff. But I'm hoping you can start to see the timeline here, that supernatural things associated with Samhain, 12th century. Ireland, 8th century, celebrating it already, long at this point, in April. The church moves the dates around through the year, ends up in November for unrelated reasons. And there's a very brief mention of Samhain having some connection to 3 local holy people in Ireland that was remembered at that point, but that's only mentioned in the 10th century. So also 200 or so years after all of Europe has already been celebrating All Hallows Eve in April and May prior to that. So all this to say, why I trust the sources I've written about and referenced is because I've gone back to primary sources as far as I am able to read about this, other than just Googling. Because if you Google and look through every top article, which I did earlier actually just to see my own point, they all just basically say the same thing. Oh, this happened, there's lots of spooky stuff going on, supernatural things. The church kind of probably just wanted to overwrite it, so they did it on November 1st. None of them cite any sources, and they all just make this bold assumption with nothing to back it up. And it just gets repeated in everything else. So that's why it's just a repeated lie. And no one actually goes back to any sources, which is what I'm trying to do to give accurate history to help people. So there you go.